So I have been at Google for about 4.5 years. My first 3 years were doing developer tools for Google Cloud. And then I spent a year on the Android team, and I just joined the Flutter team in December. So I'm still relatively.
Okay, so hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Tech Viral, and today I have a special guest, which is Mr. Chris, and he is the product manager in Google Flutter Team.
That's right.
This is the interview I'm doing for the first time, and I wanted to ask so many questions which you guys wanted to ask from Chris or from the Flutter team. So here are a few questions, Chris, if
Great.
you
Sure.
want to answer them, right?
Sure.
So can we know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I've been at Google for about 4.5 years. I spent about 3 years building developer tools for the Google Cloud Platform. And then I spent about a year doing developer tools for Android. And I've been on the team since December. So I'm still relatively new, building developer tools here in Flutter. And then before Google, spent 20 odd years building frameworks and developer tools and various other developer kinds of things in the Windows and Microsoft ecosystems.
So before proceeding for the questions, I just want to know your point about what's your vision about Flutter.
My vision for Flutter?
Yeah.
Oh, that's easy. Flutter everywhere. I want to see Flutter on every screen where we move pixels. That's where I want to see Flutter. And you're already seeing that on iOS and Android. We've been doing a bunch of experimenting on the web and various desktop platforms. I want to see Flutter everywhere you can move pixels around.
Okay, that's great. So regarding these questions which I got from the like my audience from Twitter, Facebook, YouTube and all. So these are some of the questions I collected from them.
Sure.
So the first question which people have asked is that, when we are coding in Flutter and when we are using Dart, then
Yep.
we for the designing part we are using drag and drop and some kind of tools in Android and other platforms.
Sure.
But for Flutter we are just writing you can say the vanilla code or something like
Sure.
that.
Sure.
So will there be something coming in the future where we can just drag and drop and do the things, like there is someone from the community who have made something called Flutter Studio,
Sure.
which kind of works pretty well, but is there something which is coming officially from Google?
So that's an excellent question. It turns out that there are very different ways to design UI-based apps, and I've worked in both worlds.
Yeah.
One way is, as you say, kind of drag and drop and visual designers, and that works best when you've got kind of a file format that is specifically declarative, built for tooling. And so there's been various file formats like that for various toolkits over the years. WPF had XAML, and Android has this XML layout format. And that's one way of doing it. But a lot of times what you find is that developers might start, beginning developers might start with the drag and drop. It doesn't take very long for them to become facile and to kind of move over to, they have more control, they can go faster by actually writing the code in the declarative format itself, again in the XAML or the XML. And a lot of developers in these various toolkits kind of drop down to that format. And so in Flutter, we went the other way. We said, well, if developers are just going to be writing code, and of course code is wonderful for all kinds of things, for loop, conditionals, right? All those things you want to do that you see maybe in web-based template languages and
Exactly.
things. They try to kind of build language constructs into these declarative formats, and it doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
And so with Flutter, you get the full range of the language. You also get an object literal syntax that feels very much like declarative UI, but you still get the power of code. Plus, because of hot reload, sub-second reload times, it's relatively easy to actually use your running app as kind of an interactive design time solution.
That's true.
So we right now we're very happy, and we're finding our developers have been very happy with that style of development. That's not to say I will rule out WYSIWYG developer tools. There are certainly third-party tools in the world that support Flutter. Being able to kind of lay out a UI and then being able to target Flutter as generating a widget or a project, things like that. Those tools exist. And I won't rule out any of those tools from us, but right now we're finding our customers really love going directly to the code.
That's nice. And I personally, as a developer, I feel myself that when you are writing code, then it gives you much more flexibility over
That's right.
what you are using, like a visual design or something.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a no for the time being, that we are not.
I will not say no, because I won't say never. But we're doubling down on the code for now. And in fact,
Yeah.
you'll see some improvements in the next release of Flutter that try to make it even more clear while you're writing your code that you're actually designing a tree of elements, visual elements. So we're going to be doing more with that.
So there will be different tools for analyzing that, how your visual
Actually,
trees are.
we plan on baking those kinds of services into the tools that people are already using.
Okay, that's great. So another question is that, will Flutter get support to write code in C++? Because libraries like FFmpeg for video processing requires that, and there are platform channel like which are kind of really expensive to use. So is there any kind of C++ support directly coming to Flutter?
Not to Flutter. Flutter itself is, the rendering engine and the set of widgets. But of course, but to Dart, we're working on a project called Dart FFI, and the idea with that is that you will be able to, on the platforms that we support, be able to go directly from Dart into C or C++ functions, not objects, but functions. So you could take an existing API, for example, a video codec or some existing API, and call it directly without having to go through platform channels.
That's great. Okay, and so I'm not sure whether you will be disclosing something about Fuchsia OS, but this question is about Fuchsia OS, that will Flutter be the platform for making apps for Fuchsia OS, if that is something coming in?
So that is an excellent question for the Fuchsia team.
Yeah. So, okay, let's move to the next question then. How can we build Flutter apps for devices like watch and tablets? That is the question people are asking, because I personally also have seen that not everybody is doing things for that, like
Sure.
for watches especially, because for tablets I have made few application and that works perfectly fine. But for watches, is there something which Flutter team is considering, or like there is some guides for that? Or
Well, you'll notice that you answer part of your question yourself, right? You can absolutely today use Flutter to build apps that target the iPad tablets and the Android tablets, and that's not a problem.
Yeah.
The layout nature of Flutter allows you to easily build layouts and screens that work on the larger form factors of
that's correct.
tablets. So that's all taken care of. The question about, are we going to target watches? It certainly fits into my category of Flutter everywhere.
Yeah.
But there is a certain amount of overhead in Flutter Engine. And for mobile apps and web apps and desktop apps, this is totally fine. It's not an issue. It's a small amount of overhead. But for a watch, every byte counts.
Yeah.
And so having something that does the rendering, while it would be theoretically possible for a small device like a watch, that isn't something we're pursuing right now.
Okay, so when you will talk about watches, then there will be new things like Android TV and other platforms as well where Android is supported. So
Oh, you can certainly, of course, Google has their own platform, the Wear OS, and Apple has their own for targeting watches, and you can absolutely write native code to support those today.
that's great. Okay, so moving to the another question. is like there is any third party or services to build iOS packages in in Windows or Linux?
Oh, so I think the question you ask is, hey, right now I
Yeah.
need a Mac to be able to target
Exactly,
iOS,
exactly.
right? And and you can't target, you can't build an IPA on Windows or Linux. You have to have a Mac, and that's less of a technical issue than a licensing issue. Apple's very clear that they want you to do all that with their official tooling, so that they have confidence that you've gone through their tool chain and that you've produced an IPA that meets their requirements. We have kind of brainstormed various ways we could, make this work. Maybe take advantage of shared build machines, on the subnet or in the cloud. We have brainstormed that. We haven't started any of that development. That's not currently on our roadmap. But personally, I would love that. I can't tell you when or even if that'll end up being on our plate.
Okay, so the basic idea is that if you want to develop application for iOS or even for Mac OS in the future, then it's right now it's a better way of having a MacBook or something like that, because then it will be much easier. Because
Well, not only just easier, but again, Apple makes it clear that you're going to need to do that. And the reason we think about not doing that is because you can imagine, gosh, I already have the ability to, kind of project these things from the cloud or do cloud-based builds, but there's still Macs involved, absolutely. No matter how you build, it's always going to be a Mac involved. But as you think forward past, mobile to web, of course you can run the web anywhere, or desktop, then you think, well, wait a minute, does that mean if I'm going to be targeting Windows, that I could do it from a Mac, that there would be some kind of Windows emulator? And then of course we have those, right? We have virtual machines and things like that. Suddenly it becomes very heavyweight to be able to do that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And support that in our tools. So we're currently focused on bringing Flutter everywhere, as opposed to kind of investing in these kind of virtualization technologies.
Okay.
So for the foreseeable future, whatever machine you plan to target, that's the kind of machine you'll have to have.
So my next question is based on that only.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of excitement all around the world about that particular thing to happen, and that is about what we call Hummingbird or
Sure.
Flutter Web or
Sure.
Flutter Desktop. So what's the vision about that, and when those things are coming?
Well, I can't give you any dates, but I can tell you that the Flutter team is actively working on both, and that you should stay tuned this week here at Google I/O. I'd be very surprised if you didn't hear something about both of those. And we have various other events throughout the year where I would encourage you to stay tuned, as well as the various places, the blogs and things where you get your Flutter news. Definitely stay tuned. We will have more to say about that this year.
So I would suggest people to watch Google I/O Flutter specific talks for that, and that would be very interesting. And do you have any opinion about games development in Flutter? Is there something which is like you have seen people doing, or?
I have actually. So from my point of view, you wouldn't think about Flutter, which is primarily about building buttons and navigation menus and tabs and kind of more traditional apps, as a gaming system. But there's been at least two production quality, in my experience, game libraries built around Flutter, where it provides the game loop and you provide your assets, and it does.
Like Stage Excel is one of them, if I'm not wrong.
There's been at least a couple of them I've seen, and they're pretty amazing actually, and the games that you can build with them are pretty amazing. I would have said that anything that you would normally do without firing up Unity is easily something you can do in Flutter, right?
So,
that whole genre of casual games, right? Solitaire and strategy games and card games and Tetris and that whole class of games, you could absolutely build in Flutter without any trouble.
So here we are talking about only 2D games, right? Or is there something about
Good question. Yes,
3D games?
I think 2D is probably the sweet spot. Those kind of casual games. I wouldn't see building 3D games in Flutter anytime soon. That's an area pretty well locked down by Unity.
Yeah.
Those kinds of libraries. But it would be really great if someone enterprising took Flutter and made the rendering work inside of Unity, because Unity is really great at the the scenes in the high velocity games on various kinds of hardware, but it's not so great when it comes to rendering of text or widgets or controls, that kind of interactivity. Boy, I bet the two of them together would be amazing if somebody could make that happen.
Definitely. And another interesting question I am getting is, it's something which I also personally want to ask, is that is there something in your mind about giving OTA updates to Flutter applications?
Good question. When you say OTA, you mean over the air?
Yeah.
Which is something that the two vendors we currently support in production today both support via Google Play Store and the Apple Store.
Yeah.
So over-the-air updates totally work for Flutter apps, just like they do any other kind of app supported by those platforms. If you're asking a different question, which is, do you expect to be able to do over-the-air updates by going around the store, right? Not sending that code through the store. We had an initiative that we were doing some experimenting with called dynamic updates or code push.
Exactly.
And we've recently halted the work on that. We had concerns when it comes to making sure we lived up to the policies of the store that we were targeting. And we also had some security concerns, things that require, when you're shipping arbitrary code and you're not going through the stores, which provide all kinds of infrastructure for double checking your code and making sure that you're not shipping code you shouldn't, or anyone's not shipping code they shouldn't. When you go around that, you suddenly have to build that whole infrastructure yourself, and then a sandbox for that code to run in on the device itself. And so it isn't the case that we would never consider such a thing. But we're not focused on that in 2019.
Okay, so I guess that is the thing which React Native and similar platform offers. So that might be the reason people want Flutter to support that kind of thing.
On the other hand, when you look at React Native React Native and those other web technologies are amazing, right? They leverage the technology in the browser and things like that. We are happy with the mix of high performance scrolling and animations and 60 frames a second support that we get from having a very lightweight targeting native UI toolkit in Flutter, and we're very careful about building up anything that would affect that performance or that user experience that we're very proud of today.
That's great. And I guess there are multiple platforms for doing things, and I believe that every platform has a different role to play.
That's right.
And it should depend on the use case of the user to which platform he should choose, right?
Agreed. I agree with that.
So
right tool for the right job.
Exactly.
Yes.
So there's one more question which is kind of interesting, that will Flutter ever talk to device drivers directly, or will it be always via plugins?
When you say device drivers, even plugins don't talk to device drivers directly. There's when you write a plugin, it's all about you writing your Dart code and you're sending message over to your Android code, your iOS code today, or maybe your Windows and Mac code in the future, etc. And then you write your code in Java or Kotlin or Swift or Objective-C that access the libraries provided by the platform directly.
Right.
But even that code, they're not talking directly to device drivers, right? The device drivers are bits of code written in C or C++ or assembly language that exist kind of outside of user space at the kernel space, that talk to like your sensors or your camera or your audio equipment on your phone, etc. So even if you're writing a native app today and there's no Flutter in the picture, you're still not talking directly to the device driver.
That's true. Okay. So basically, I guess this question is kind of relatable to the second question which I asked about the C++ support.
Yeah, so Dart FFI, right, the ability to be able to call directly from your Dart code in your Flutter app to an existing C-style API, the native library on the device, or a third-party library that you want to bundle with your app. That is something we're tackling right now.
That's great. Okay, so there is one more question, the last question which I want to ask, is that people want to know if there can be some option in the future where you can just press a single button and it could export all of the like APK for Android, IPA for
Sure.
iOS, and all
Sure.
those things. So is it going to be possible in the future?
So when you say single button, do you mean that I'm in Visual Studio Code or I'm in Android Studio and I say give me everything, right? And in the future that could mean Android, iOS, web, Windows, Mac, Linux, all
Exactly.
at once. Press the button once.
Yeah.
Today we enable that. There's a command line option that says Flutter build, and you can say, oh, I want an APK, I want an IPA, right? I want to target Android and iOS, and you could imagine, in the future being able to do the exact same thing for the other 4 platforms. And my question is it the case that because you could write a script that just you run little script and called 6 commands, and that would be the equivalent. And I'm just curious what such a button would do that a little script wouldn't do. I guess you could imagine Flutter build all, right? And it would just build everything it knew how to build, and it would have to pick up the configuration from some kind of configuration file. I hadn't really considered that. If that's something that provides value to developers, it's relatively easy for us to build it.
I guess in that scenario, kind of CICD tools can be
Sure.
pretty handful for your users, because then you have all those, like you have to just press one button in that case, and those builds will be generated for you.
So in the CICD case, there's no buttons at all, right? You've got some script running in some build machine in a closet, right? And so now we're talking about the difference between Flutter build this, Flutter build that, Flutter build the other, versus Flutter build all.
Maybe.
I won't rule it out. I just have to understand the relative impact of that versus implementing another feature for Flutter Web or for Flutter Desktop, or we as much as it might not seem like it, here at Google we have very talented engineers, but we only have a certain number of them.
Yeah.
And as the PM, it's my job to figure out the highest possible impact I can have, right? How do I make the Flutter developer's life as the best I possibly can with my limited set of engineering resources? And so I'm not sure I would spend them on a Flutter build all until I've kind of covered the ground in a lot of other places.
That's great. So these are the questions which actually people ask. There are 2 other questions which I am adding just because I have seen them like floating all around.
Sure.
So one question is that whenever someone is working on a new technology, then the first thing which is in his or her mind is that will we get jobs in that particular technology? So what do you think about having Flutter jobs in the market, maybe today or maybe in the future?
Actually, there is a job site now for Flutter Jobs. I don't know it off the top of my head because I'm still relatively new, but I can certainly provide that to you, and you can stick it as a link in your show notes. But even a bigger question is, I can talk to customers all the time. We love Flutter. We want to use Flutter. We're going to use Flutter. Where do we get Flutter developers? right? Because we're kind of in this bootstrapping
Yeah, so
process. And I'll tell them what I told you, which is if you're looking for Flutter developers, if you've got a web developer, if you've got an Android developer, if you've got an iOS developer, you already have a Flutter developer. Any one of these developers can pick up Dart in an afternoon, can pick up Flutter in a few days, can be productive in a matter of weeks, not months.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, what you want to say to the people who are watching this, that is this the right time to learn Flutter for everyone?
Oh, absolutely. Flutter is an amazing environment. I came to the Flutter team because I myself enjoyed writing Flutter code so much. And so when I got here, to see not only we've done such a great job for the mobile platforms, but we're so far on both web and desktop environments. I'm so excited about what's going to happen this year in the overall quest for Flutter everywhere. That it is a wonderful time to learn how to be a Flutter developer.
That's great. So that's it, I guess. And thank you so much, Chris, for joining me and for giving your precious time. And it's really great talking to you and asking these questions. And I hope that many of the viewers have got the answer for the these are some questions which is like in everyone's mind. So thank you so much again, and it's great to be here. And,
Great.
And looking forward for the new announcements in Google I/O.
Great. Well,
So-
it was my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And maybe you can tell my subscriber to subscribe to this channel. Maybe if in future I'm gonna come again.
Wait,
and
where's the button? I see this on the YouTube videos all the time.
there
Click
should be
the
a
button.
someone in below.
Oh, below.
Yeah.
Click the subscribe button below. Absolutely, you should subscribe.
Maybe in future I'll again come here, and maybe we can.
Oh, absolutely. You're welcome back anytime. Happy to have you back, and happy to answer more questions.
Thank you so
bet.
much, and it's great talking to you.
Absolutely.
So keep enjoying, keep learning Flutter, and I'll see you in the next.